Welcome, very warm welcome this evening to the 10-2 webinar, and we're focusing on, as you can see, unlocking your potential. I'm Tracy Adams, a director with 10-2, and I'm delighted to welcome Debbie Denyer from Coach the Difference. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you.
We've worked with Debbie before, and we have some great sessions that Debbie's delivered before, and this is a new subject we're covering tonight. Debbie is a qualified executive coach. She spent 15 years in senior leadership roles supporting people through change. So I'm very interested in tonight's session. We've been through it a couple of times. There's some good stuff coming. So some quick practicals before we jump into the content. We've scheduled about 40 minutes for the webinar, including questions. There is a Q&A box at the bottom, so please do pop any Q&As down there if you've got any as we go along, and I'll do my best to keep up. If we have lots or I'm unsure of the answer, then we'll try and get around to answering those either at the end or tomorrow. It'll be helpful if you've got a pen and paper, but don't worry, we are sending out a summary of this afterwards. But if you've got a pen and paper to hand, just to make notes as you're going through, but please don't make copious notes, because a copy will come out tomorrow. So without further ado, and I think we've got a lot of people in now. So Debbie, shall I hand over to you to kick off?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So tonight we are going to be talking about unlocking your potential. So maximizing your self-awareness for job search success. So what are we covering? So we're covering how the role of self-awareness can help in terms of your career success, identifying your personal strengths, preferences, and communication styles, and how using self-awareness helps you to communicate the value that you can bring to an organization and make informed career decisions. So I'm going to get you engaged right from the start. So can you give me a reaction using the reaction buttons on Zoom if your job search sometimes feels overwhelming?
Yeah, there you go.
Brilliant, got a few coming. Yeah, so as you can see, so you're not alone in terms of that. Don't worry. And it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole. It's easy to kind of start looking at job applications, start filling them in, but not finishing, and flitting between, you know, am I interested in this role or am I interested in that role? And it can become really overwhelming, and your desk might look like this and your brain might feel like this. So do not worry, you are definitely not alone in that. And so that's where self-awareness comes in. So the benefits of self-awareness are really about giving you clarity around what are the job roles that you should be focusing your efforts on, who are the companies that you should be targeting, and also that ability to be able to articulate your strengths and the value that you bring to potential employers in an interview, and therefore feel more confident in navigating those interviews as well. So strengths, we often find it really hard to identify our own strengths. We're very good at coming up with weaknesses, but we find it hard to identify our own strengths. So I'm going to share with you just a few different tools that you can use. So on the basis that we find it a lot easier to identify our weaknesses, what you can do is turn your weaknesses upside down. So reframe your weaknesses as strengths. So what I'd like you to do is, in the chat box, could you just put in what your weaknesses are? So you can pick one weakness and just pop it into the chat function. So nobody else will see it. We're not going to read out names or anything. So just pop in a weakness that you think that you've got. And that could be traits or behaviors that have been kind of identified in feedback, or it might be things that you feel hold you back in certain situations.
We've got procrastination, self-doubt, overthinking tasks, attention to detail, less big picture, imposter syndrome, quiet, take on too much, got a few repeats, some very similar ones coming through actually. Another sort of attention to detail, lack of confidence a few times. Yeah, some similar ones.
So see how quick and easy that was to come up with
Yeah.
those. So we tend to have quite a negative bias, and we tend to be able to see our weaknesses kind of much more easily. But you can reframe them, so you can turn them upside down and see them differently. So, for example, the one about being kind of having attention to detail. So what you do is you ask yourself, what positive quality is that linked to? So being too detail oriented can mean that you've got a strong eye for detail and for quality. And then you can take that a step further to then say, okay, well, how can you then take action on that? So the strong eye for detail means that you aim for high quality work. But what you might need to do is set yourself clear limits to avoid perfectionism. So you can kind of take it a step further. So you're not only seeing it as a strength, but also seeing it as, how can you make sure that you don't overplay that. So we had somebody saying that they take on too much. So taking on too much might be that actually that you have a tendency to help others, that you're kind of supportive and empathetic towards others. So that might be the kind of the twist on that. But in terms of kind of taking on too much, one way of looking at that is how can you, again, set boundaries on that? So it might be thinking about, if I'm helping others, I'm taking on too much because I'm doing things for others. Am I helping them, or am I hindering them by taking this on? Is there another way I can work it around? So if I'm actually really empathetic and supportive, maybe it's about coaching that person, developing that person, by allowing them to do the work, but you acting in a more of a supportive coaching type role, but kind of turning that into a positive rather than a negative. So it might be just thinking of some others. So the kind of overly cautious bit could be that you're kind of thorough and you assess risk carefully before making decisions. If you find it hard to say no to others, it might be that you're a team player and you're supportive of others. If it's that actually you get really frustrated with slow progress, then that could be that you're highly driven and you're passionate about achieving goals. So with each of them, you can kind of turn that weakness upside down and see it as a positive. So the next approach in terms of identifying strengths is thinking about a time when you were doing your best work. So when were you energized? When were you motivated? And you accomplished something significant. So for me, thinking back to when I was kind of leading a large team, the kind of biggest accomplishments for me were really about their personal development. When members of my team achieved something or they were promoted, and so actually reflecting on the skills and the strengths that I was using then was actually about helping them in their personal development, helping them manage team dynamics, that kind of thing. And I then realized that I had real strengths in coaching and empathy and communication. And so thinking about, well, how could that be applied differently? And so for me, that was about, well, actually, I could retrain as an executive coach. So I could apply those strengths in a different way to the way that I was when I was working as a senior leader. So thinking about in those kind of situations where you were really energized, where you were really motivated, what were the strengths that you were using? So things like problem solving, creativity, communication, and how could that be applied to different job opportunities? And then also reflecting on roles that you're applying for at the moment. Do those strengths align with the types of roles that you're pursuing? Because if we're in a role where we're using our strengths, we will perform much better, we will be much happier, we will be much more energized and motivated. So looking at it from that perspective. And then the last kind of idea in terms of identifying strengths is to ask other people. So as I said, it's a lot easier to identify our own weaknesses, but other people are much better at spotting our own strengths. So, and we often think that what we do is nothing special, because actually if we're really good at it, we just kind of do it anyway and we don't think much of it. So asking friends, asking colleagues or mentors to describe what they think your top strengths are. And then also comparing that with your own self-perception. So there was a few people that kind of said that they lacked confidence. And so actually this is a really nice thing to do, and it might feel a bit daunting, but you know, ask friends, ask people that you know, and comparing what they say with your own self-perception, and kind of recognizing that you know that you have got some real strengths there. Are there any surprises, or is it kind of confirming what you already know? And reflecting on, you know, how that aligns with your career goals and what you're doing. And if you are too scared to go and ask anybody else, what you can do is you can just ask yourself the question from an external perspective. So if I said, Tracy, how would your friends describe you? What would you say?
Loyal, always there.
Yeah. So it's much easier if you're just even thinking from an external perspective about how would your friends describe you, rather than if I said to you, what are your strengths? And you might go, oh, I don't know, I haven't got any. So just in itself, just asking, you know, how would your friends describe you?
Yeah.
So once you know those strengths, you need to make sure that they are reflected in your CV, in your cover letters, in your LinkedIn profile, in that elevator pitch, you know, so when you get asked the question, tell me about yourself, or what is it that you do? You know, being able to kind of make sure that you're identifying some of your strengths within that. And then interview as well. So when you're preparing for interview and you're creating what's called the kind of the STAR responses, so situation, task, action, result, you know, thinking about the different achievements that you've had, and what action you took to achieve those things, making sure that you're including your strengths within that as well. So that kind of self-awareness of what are your strengths, what is it that you uniquely bring to an organization, can feed into all of those different things. And in terms of your CV, you might have a customer services team leader and another customer services team leader CV. And really, it should be that if your friend reads your CV, that they can recognize you from it, and that your CV really kind of represents you and who you are and the strengths that you've got, versus another person doing exactly the same role as you. So we now know what our strengths are. And then we need to think about, well, what are our different work preferences? And I'm sure that all of you will have experienced, you know, team dynamics that haven't been fantastic, or different kind of management styles that haven't quite worked for you, or, you know, the culture of an organization. So all of those things can affect your job satisfaction and your performance. So one of the things that you can do, and this is not at all scientific, is to do happiness charts. So the happiness chart, you plot different roles that you've had in terms of how happy you were within those roles. So you just plot out all of the different roles, and, you know, happiness, unhappiness. And then what you do is that you think about some of the roles where you were really happy and some of the roles where you were really unhappy. So you don't have to go through all of them, just select some where you were really happy and somewhere where you were really unhappy. And then what you need to do is take quite a kind of a logical approach to assessing each of those roles. So in doing that, you think about, what was it that contributed to the happiness or the unhappiness? So what was it about the company's purpose, the company's goals, the company's values that made you happy or unhappy? Was there anything around the kind of the working conditions, the hours of work, the flexibility of the work, you know, whether it was hybrid working or, you know, remote working, things about the level of responsibility that you were given or the salary, the kind of benefits package, the people, so your colleagues, if you were in a team, your manager, what was it about those things that contributed to your happiness and unhappiness? And then thinking about the kind of the tasks you were doing, the skills you were using. So thinking back to that strengths where I asked you, you know, when you were most energized, what was it that you were doing? So thinking about, you know, how did that impact your happiness levels, the kind of work that you were doing? And then also, you know, the location of the company, the size of the company, the stage of the company, you know, was it a kind of entrepreneurial company? Was it well established? How might that have affected, you know, your kind of happiness or unhappiness? So once you've done that for those roles, you then look to see whether there are any themes that have come out of that. And it gives you some clues that help you to tailor your job search to kind of fit your preferences. So effectively, you create a criteria that you can assess job roles against. So if you think back to that picture of overwhelm at the start, you're now getting a kind of a criteria that when you're looking at jobs that are available, you can assess and go, okay, well, how does this fit against this criteria that I've got? And whilst you might not be able to find a role that meets all of that criteria, you can prioritize them. So you can kind of rank that list in order and think about which of those areas where you might be more happy to compromise. So that then means that when you're looking at all these jobs and you're flitting between them all, you can kind of go, well, that one doesn't fit. Let's move on, and focus your energy on the roles that and the companies that best align with your work preferences, and you know where you can excel. You can also use that information at interview to help you assess if the role or the company culture aligns with your strengths and your values and your preferences. So, for example, whilst doing this, you might have identified that actually personal development is really important to you, and you were in a role where you didn't have opportunities to develop and grow, and that was contributing to your unhappiness there. So then at interview, you can be asking the question, how does the company support ongoing learning and development? And it may be that, you know, you worked in a team before that didn't collaborate very effectively, lots of kind of silo working. And so you might then say, you know, can you describe the team dynamics and how collaboration typically works? So use the kind of clues from what you've done here to think about some questions that you can ask at interview stage. And obviously recognizing that an interview is as much about you finding out, is this the right company for me? Is this the right role for me? Is it the right fit for me? As it is about them finding out whether you're the right fit for them. So it's a two-way thing.
Yeah.
So the other thing that you can do is add in any twists and turns in your career. So you might have taken time out to care for children or relatives or due to health issues. And you can add those kind of twists and turns into your job chart and reflect on what it was that you learned from those experiences. And so, for example, I was supporting a client who had some time out of the workplace to have twins. And she saw that as a real gap in her CV. So she actually described it as a kind of a cliff edge, that she'd, you know, been working, and then she'd had this time off with the twins, and then she was going back to work, and that there was this sort of gap, this cliff edge, where she felt that she'd lost a lot of skills and didn't have so much value to give to the workplace. And so in the coaching, we worked on helping her to see, well, what were the strengths that she'd developed whilst having that time with the twins. And so she developed amazing organizational skills, absolutely fantastic organizational skills. But also it had changed her focus. And so her priority now for the workplace was different to how it was before. And it meant that she was really focused on, I'm going to go in, I'm going to be efficient, I'm going to be effective, because I want to make sure that I'm home for school pickup. And so she could then tell the story and share her strengths in a way that actually it's, you know, this is what I can bring to you as an employer. This is the value that I bring to you as a result of this kind of twist and turn within my career. Okay, so we've talked about the strengths, we talked about the work preferences. So these are kind of our self-awareness and helping us to target our search. And then there's behavioural and communication preferences. So we all have different behavioural and communication preferences, and being aware of your own preferences and those of others can help you in your job search. So you may have seen similar tools before. This is Clarity 4D, and it's similar to things like Insights Discovery and DISC. And it recognises that we each have our own preferences in terms of how we gather information, make decisions, and respond to situations. And the Clarity 4D model doesn't put you in a box. It says that we're all a mix of all 4 colours, but we have higher and lower preferences. So for me, green is my most dominant, and then red, and then yellow, and then blue. So I want you to just have a look at those words in those boxes and just think about what might be your colour order, and then put in the chat what might be your colour order. So mine was green was my most dominant, then red, then yellow, then blue. So you can either put all 4 in order, or you could just put what you think your most dominant is. And we'll have a look, see what we get.
I think I'm green, blue, yellow, and red in that order. Let's have a look. Let's see what people are saying. Taking a while to read them all. There we go. Hang on. Yeah, there. Someone with a red, yellow, green, blue. Green leading, green, blue, red, yellow. Yeah, there's a few more coming in. Perfect. Yeah, there's quite a few coming in. A few blues, a few greens starting. Real complete mixed bag.
Yeah. So what you see is that we're all completely different. And when you complete a Clarity 4D assessment, you would receive a report that gives you a kind of percentage for each of the different ones. So even if you had the same colour order as somebody else, you wouldn't necessarily have the same percentage as somebody else in terms of the dominance of each of those colours. So how does that help in terms of kind of interviews and job search then? So this model can be really helpful in helping to answer that horrible interview question, which is, you know, tell me about your weaknesses. And so you can kind of use this question, use this tool to be able to think about how you might use your strengths to overcome your weaknesses, and how you might answer that question. So for me, I mentioned green is my most dominant colour. And so I'm very empathetic, I'm very supportive, I put others first, and I'm very, very altruistic. I want to help absolutely everybody. So setting up my own business, I was at risk of just giving away my coaching and training services for free to everybody. So what I decided to do was design my business to share my profits with a charity that supports at-risk young people. And so that enables me to give back. So that helps in terms of my sort of green preference. But in order to do that, in order to be able to give back to charity and share my profits with charity, I need to be able to use my red energy and my blue energy, because I need to be able to set myself some goals and targets, and I also need to be able to manage my money effectively, so that I can do that. So my self-awareness has helped me kind of reframe and prioritize what I'm doing. So if somebody says, you know, can you provide this for free? I now think, well, if I'm saying yes to providing that for free, I'm saying no to helping young people at risk. So you can use this tool to kind of help you think about those strengths and weaknesses, and how you might use them. So it can also be helpful in terms of your job search strategy. So as I mentioned before, we are much better. We're much more energized when we're using our strengths, and much more effective when we're using our strengths. So for those of you that said you were high blue, you might prefer a more analytical approach to job search. So you could set up yourself a spreadsheet or use a kind of free CRM tool to kind of track and analyze what you're doing in relation to your job search. You might also prefer, you tend to be more introverted, so you might prefer one-to-one kind of conversations to build your network and having sort of more in-depth conversations with people. If you are high green, you're empathetic and supportive. So taking a kind of relationship building approach to that kind of networking. So thinking about how can I help someone? What could I share with somebody else that might help them? And therefore that kind of taking a sort of supportive, caring approach, and then they can help you. Or joining a kind of a community, a sort of job search community, or kind of groups relating to your sector, community kind of feel, in terms of building your network. Also having an accountability buddy, so that thing of always helping everybody else first. So having somebody that you can hold you to account in terms of your job search. If red is more your dominant colour, then setting yourself clear goals and targets. And you might be more comfortable with direct outreach, maybe with people that you don't know. And if yellow is your highest preference, then that's the kind of the networking, going to conferences, going to kind of larger events and using those skills in terms of being more sociable and talkative. And also building your kind of personal brand, using your creativity. It might be that you're using LinkedIn to kind of share content about yourself and what you're doing, and using that to benefit your job search. So how does all of this kind of link together? So self-awareness, in terms of your strengths, your work preferences, your behavioural and communication preferences, helps you to think about who are the companies that you need to be targeting, and how they align. What are the roles that you need to be applying for? Feeding those strengths into your CV and your cover letter and into your LinkedIn profile. Making sure that that self-awareness of your strengths is reflected within your STAR examples for interview. And then also thinking about those work preferences that you've highlighted and the questions that you want to be asking the employer at interview to make sure that you're going to get what you need as an employee. And then thinking about how your behavioural preferences might influence your job search strategy and the approach that you're going to take. So that's it for me. Please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm going to ask you if you've got any questions in a second, but do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I do share various kind of tips and hints and things on LinkedIn. And as I said, I'm very altruistic, so I quite often probably share far more than I should.
It's a good thing.
More than welcome to follow and connect with me. And if I can help at all in your job search, I always will. So,
Brilliant. Thank you, Debbie. So we have got a couple of questions, if we could go through a few of them. So someone has talked about the interview process and not having much confidence in interviews now. And I suspect, looking at your previous slide on how all of what you've talked about tonight helps with all of those elements of the job search, I guess there must be areas that it will also help contribute towards improving confidence, will it?
Yeah. So the more aware of your strengths that you are, and as we said, weaknesses can be flipped to be strengths. The more self-aware you are, then the more confident that you can come across the interview. It's about being able to communicate to the employer, this is the value that I can bring. And so spending a bit of time going through these kind of examples, and tools and techniques helps you to be able to confidently answer, that horrible question around weaknesses, but be able to answer it in a positive way, to say, this is a weakness of mine. However, this is the action that I take to ensure that I've overcome that. So yeah, so confidence interview, preparation, star responses, researching the company, seeing it as a conversation between you and them, seeing it as much about you finding out whether this is the right fit for you as the other way around. So remembering those questions that you want to be asking, turn it into a conversation, and just see it as a kind of a meeting between two people as opposed to interrogation. Ultimately, they want to find out the best from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that's absolutely spot on. Completely agree. So there's another one here about could you go into a bit more detail about how a predominantly green person can network and connect with others, you know, when more shy and quiet?
Yeah. Okay. So let me just jump back to green. So green is kind of this empathetic, concerned, supportive, patient, easygoing. So for both green and blue, actually, if you tend to be more on the introverted side of the scale, if you're high green or blue. So smaller networking. So, you know, arranging a coffee with somebody, and doing that kind of one-to-one kind of networking. Also doing it so that you're asking for connections from connections you've already got. So using your ability to build relationships and build rapport with people to, you know, it might be that you arrange a coffee with somebody and say, you know, I'd love to find out more about the role that you do, or I'd love to find out more about your company, quite interested in your company, you know, what are some of the challenges you're facing at the moment? And then in that conversation, you say, is there anybody else that you think it would be useful for me to speak to? And then would you be happy to connect me to that person? So you're using that kind of relationship building skill to be connected rather than having to kind of go out and do that cold calling effectively.
Yeah.
Also thinking about if you are going to kind of networking events at all, and you're more introverted, look for the other people that are standing next to the wall. So look for the people that are on their own because they're more likely to be more introverted too. Or go and stand by the coffee or the tea, because it's a lot easier if you're standing by the coffee or the tea and somebody else comes along, you can start a conversation. So look for that, and look if you've got groups of people, look at how the people are standing. If people are standing kind of more open in a group, they're probably less likely to know each other. So you might be able to kind of join that conversation as opposed to if they're kind of standing face to face. So using tips like that, turning up. I'm terrible at this, but turning up early, because if you turn up early, then people will gradually come in, and so you've only then got to speak to, you know, one person that's come in or two people that have come in, and so you can build that relationship there, as opposed to walking into the room when everybody's already in there, and then it's like, oh gosh, how do I connect with people now?
Yeah, and it's that awkward going to interrupt a conversation that's already going on. Then can I join? Which is awful. With this one, I think goes back to an earlier slide, but it might just be worth touching on this again. So they've got here, my biggest issue seems to be to identify the roles that I would have liked to apply for. So I think you talked about using some of your preferences to do that. Could we just cover that a little bit again? That's it. Yeah, that's it.
So thinking, so going through this kind of happiness, unhappiness charts that I talked about. So plotting your happiness and unhappiness between different jobs, and then identifying for each of these different kind of headings, what was it that contributed to that happiness or unhappiness, and that giving you a criteria to kind of assess against. So when you're looking at those roles, if you've got a criteria then that you're assessing against, so you know that actually for me what's really important is that it's a organization that's a medium-sized organization, that it's located within, you know, this sort of area, that, you know, equality and diversity is really important to me in terms of kind of company values and what they're doing there. And I need flexibility within the role, and the tasks that I'm most passionate about are these. Then it just gives you a criteria to kind of knock off a few of those jobs that you're looking at. So it helps you to kind of stop flitting around quite so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the person that's just come back and said actually it's that when they've done their criteria, they've sort of wiped out all their options. So I think it was the case, as you said earlier on, didn't you, about prioritizing.
Yeah. You can, if you're more of an analytical mindset than me, as you notice, my blue is the lowest. But if you're more analytical than me, you can kind of weight the different elements. So you can kind of give a score, a weighting to each of those different things within your list as well, to then be able to kind of assess against. And then also, you know, if you've kind of knocked out everything, sometimes it's about approaching the job search slightly differently. So using it as the opportunity to kind of explore rather than kind of be sort of funneling down. So actually, if you're finding that you've got nothing to work with, take a bit of pressure off of yourself, and try and see it as an exploration, and maybe go and have a conversation with somebody who's doing a similar role, or go and have a conversation with somebody who's working in a particular organization and find out a bit more about the organization, and just do it as a kind of a bit of a exploration to see, can you widen that out a little bit at all?
Yeah, great. We've had a couple of people who've said they've got a profile from one of these profiles that you've talked about, DISC, Insights, and should they use them with recruiters or hiring manager employers when they're applying for a job? So, you know, should they send it in with their CV?
Personally, I wouldn't advise you to. I think it's a really useful tool for yourself, and it's also a really useful tool if you're working within an organization and you're happy to share it with your manager. Then that's a really useful tool to help them to understand how best to support you and how best to work with you. It's from my perspective, I've always found that I think it's the key thing is you being able to use it as a tool to increase your self-awareness and identify, you know, what are the key points for you that you want to reflect within your CV or your LinkedIn profile or your star responses. Because for somebody who if you're sending it to somebody and they may not have had training in it, they may not have seen one of these things before, or have kind of briefing on it, they might read it the wrong way. They might take it out of context, and see it differently. So use it as a tool for yourself, and make sure that it reflects what you want to kind of portray.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I know there's lots of questions on here around dealing with gaps on your CV, cover letters, good CVs and adapting CVs. So obviously we haven't got time tonight to cover that, and it's those are huge topics. In fact, we have webinars on each of those in their own right. So I just wanted to acknowledge those questions on the Q&A here, to say that when I send out a follow-up tomorrow, I will include various links to all of those other kinds of webinars and that we've covered. So CV writing, mind the gap, your gap on your CV, cover letters, all that sort of thing as well, just to give you some additional information. And yes, lots of people have asked, will there be the recording? Yes, the recording will also be sent out, probably Monday, but yeah, that'll go out as well. So I hope that covers what we can now in the time we've got. Obviously, we will cover more tomorrow in the follow-up, and we'll do a follow-up FAQs for everybody. So I'm going to draw it to a close now. So thank you very, very much, Debbie. Some really good stuff in there. I hope it's given everybody food for thought. And thank you for joining us tonight. And we'll follow up and have a good evening, good rest of evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye all.